I'm just gonna begin here. Can all of you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes, good. And welcome, Debbie. Uh, we've got how many people? We have 12 people online. So thank you for joining us, those who are online. This is an introductory course into Buddhism. I've done a number of various lectures before, and I thought it was time that I step back and go back to an introduction for those of you who may not have had the opportunity or who just wish to brush up a little bit more on the basics or the instruction to Buddhism. So, my name is Grant Ikuta. I think most of you know me. I'm the resident minister here, and I welcome you all. What we're going to do tonight is, let me just get up here. That was shared on the screen. Okay, you can see this all on your screen. Yes, I believe you can. Okay, so this is the material I'm using today. I've used in other lectures as well, because it is an introductory lecture, but it is Buddhism for beginners. Just to give you a little insight into this this actually comes from a book, Traveling with the Buddha. And as you can see, there's a pair of footprints on this, and you can see it on the screen there, Debbie. Um, and these footprints, this was how they used to mark where the Buddha was at. During the time that the Buddha was alive, he did not like to have an image of himself or a statue or things like that because he didn't believe in that kind of idol worshiping. So instead, they used his footprints as a way to demark where the Buddha had been. So that's just an aside. But what I'd like to do, so first of all, welcome to everyone. And it should be a 5 week program. It may continue on. For those who have taken some of my other classes, you'll know that I often get off on tangents and it doesn't go as quickly as I would like to. But this is what I'm planning on talking about. So today we'll start off with a general overview and introduction to the life of Siddhartha Gautama, who is the historical Buddha. And then I'm hoping to get at least to the timeline of when he became enlightened. And then next week, I will follow that up with what some of his basic principles and teachings were. And we'll continue that on the third week. And then by the fourth week, hopefully, I get into the introduction of the Sangha and the spread of Buddhism through Asia. And finally, getting into our particular school, Buddhism, which is part of the Japanese Buddhism, and introducing a little bit about Japanese Buddhism, plus how it established itself as a world religion. So, with that being said, is that too small on your screens? Can you all see that? Is that better? That might be better. Okay. So, yeah, that's what we're planning on doing. Now, one of the things that I would like to start off with, and this is something that we do. So in Buddhism, just as in all other major world religions, there are many different schools of Buddhism. Okay, and so often we will chant sutras. Sutras are the words of the Buddha, we will chant various chants that are specific to our particular lineage or school of Buddhism. However, there is something that is common that is chanted amongst all Buddhists, and I'm going to introduce it in the more traditional way, which is known as, in English, the homage and the three treasures. And how it's normally done, this is in Pali right now. So um, uh, what we will do is it's repeated 3 times. So um, if you can just follow me for those of you, and the reason why this is important, it talks about what we call the 3 treasures of Buddhism, which is the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And I'll get into more of that as we get in the course. But the Buddha was, of course, the historical being. But Buddha, it means enlightened or awakened one. And so it is a title. And then the Dharma is the teachings. And finally, the Sangha is the community. Okay. So what we're going to do is go over these. Oh, yeah. Okay. So I'm going to read the Sanskrit and then, or the Pali in this case, and then you could read the English. For those of you who wish to read the Pali, you're more than welcome to join me. So it goes like this. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Homage to him, the exalted one, the enlightened one, the supremely awakened one. Dutiyampi Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. For the second time, homage to him, the exalted one, the enlightened one, the supremely awakened one. Tatiyampi Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. For the third time, homage to him, the exalted one, the enlightened one, the supremely awakened one. Kisarana, 3 treasures. Buddham saranam gacchami. I go to the Buddha for guidance. Dhamman saranam gacchami. I go to the Dharma for guidance. Sangam saranam gacchami. I go to the Sangha for guidance. Dutiyampi Buddham saranam gacchami. For the second time, I go to the Buddha for guidance. Dutiyampi Dhamman saranam gacchami. For the second time, I go to the Dharma for guidance. Dutiyampi Sangam saranam gacchami. For the second time, I go to the Sangha for guidance. Tatiyampi Buddham saranam gacchami. For the third time, I go to the Buddha for guidance. Tatiyampi Dhamman saranam gacchami. For the third time, I go to the Dharma for guidance. Tatiyampi Sangam saranam gacchami. For the third time, I go to the Sangha for guidance. Namandos, namandos. So we'll begin each session by reading this. As I mentioned, this is one thing that is common to all Buddhists, regardless of the denomination or school. And it is usually read or chanted in one form or another at the beginning of every gathering that we have. So we will begin with that. So as I mentioned, today we're going to go into a little bit of the life of the Buddha. And of course, it starts off approximately 2,500 years ago. The exact dates are not written down. So we say approximately between 2,500 to 2,600 years ago. And the Buddha, the story goes that there was a kingdom called Kapilavastu. And Kapilavastu is in the northeastern part of India, um, what is now known as today as the province of Bihar. And in that province, there was a small kingdom called Kapilavastu. And there was a king, King Suddhodana, and Queen Maya. And they hadn't had a child for a number of years. And the legend says that one day or one night, Queen Maya has a dream of a white elephant with six tusks that comes down from what we call the Tusita heavens and enters into her right side, and she becomes pregnant with the baby Buddha. And so after 9 months, as was a tradition at that time, Queen Maya is returning from Kapilavastu to her uh, birth uh, kingdom, neighboring kingdom. And on the way there, her entourage takes rest in a place called Lumbini's garden. It is actually, Lumbini today is actually located on the Nepal side. It's in Nepal, just on the very south portion of Nepal. And so the entourage has a rest there. And it's said at that time, one of the trees gently bends its bough or branch down so that Queen Maya could reach up and grab it. And as she does so, she conceives and the baby is born. And this is from a little booklet on the life of Buddha, cartoonized or illustrated book. And there's a very famous, so it says that the infant, when he was born, he immediately stood up, took 7 steps, and pointed his right hand to the heavens and his left hand to the earth, and was said to say, uh, above and below the heavens, I alone am the world honored one. Okay. So this is supposedly what the Buddha said. Um, his name at that time was not the Buddha. Buddha was a title that was given to him. Eventually, when they did name him, they named him Siddhartha. Siddhartha. Um, Siddhartha, and the clan name was Gautama. Gautama. So his name was Siddhartha Gautama. And when we look at this legend, we need to think about it a little bit. So one of the things that Buddhism doesn't claim is that one has to believe in miracles. Okay, it's not a teaching of miracles, and yet when you look at this legend of this birth of the baby Buddha, one could almost say that's quite miraculous. You don't see newborn infants standing up, taking 7 steps, and pointing to the sky and earth and speaking, right? So, how do we understand this legend? And that's a very interesting point. And most Buddhist scholars would say that yes, this is indeed just probably was a legend. For him to take 7 steps, that's symbolic. It's said that there are 6 realms of suffering. And so the 7th step is to symbolize that the Buddha will go on to go beyond the realms of suffering and go into what we call the realm of enlightenment or the Buddhahood. So that's what most scholars would say that's what that symbolizes, those 7 steps. And then him pointing to the sky and to the heavens and to the earth and saying, above and below the heavens, I alone am the world honored one. Um, Scholars differ on their interpretation of this. Some would say, well, of course, because he became the Buddha. Of course, he's the world honored one. Others would say, in fact, that each and every being that is born into this earth Uh, each of us, when we take that first breath and let out that cry of the baby, that in fact is the baby saying, I alone am the world onward, meaning that for each one of us, our own life, our singular life, is the most important life. It is the only life that we know. So those are a couple of understandings or interpretations along with this birth. Now, the other legend that there's a couple more other stories that are associated with the birth of the Buddha, and one of them is the fact that so after the baby was born, he was taken back to the royal palace at Kapilavastu, and as was the tradition at that time, uh, people from around the kingdom came to celebrate the birth of the newborn prince. So they would come from far and wide, and amongst them was a quite a renowned prophet, a mountain sayer by the name of Ashita. Ashita, and this Ashita is given the honor of carrying the newborn infant. And the moment he carries him, he starts crying, he starts weeping. And when people around him ask him, why is it that he is crying? And Ashita replies that he's shedding both tears of joy and tears of sadness. And he says that he's shedding tears of joy because he realizes that he is holding within his arms the future Buddha. And yet at the same time, he says, I'm shedding tears of sadness because I know that by the time this child grows up to be the Buddha, I will no longer be on this earth. So, and then he continues on by saying, Shita says, should this child grow up and becomes the heir of the throne and takes the throne as the new king, he will be a wise and just ruler. However, he says, should this child encounter suffering, he will forego the kingdom and become a leader for all mankind. So, of course, the father, King Suddhodana, is alarmed by this prophet. On one hand, yes, it's nice to think that your child is going to grow up to become the future Buddha, but at the same time, his position as a king, he had longed for an heir to the throne, and so I think, as would be normal for many fathers, his reaction was, of course, he wants his son to take over, and so he then raises young Siddhartha, and his name that's chosen, Siddhartha, means every wish fulfilled or wish fulfilled. And so Siddhartha grows up, and his father makes sure that he's leads a very sheltered life. And what I mean by that, well, it is stated that, oh, actually, before I go any further, so this is what Lumbini like. Oh, it looked like in the year 2000, a group of us went on a pilgrimage, and it was nothing like what I had imagined, because when you hear the stories of Lumbini's gardens, you think of this very lush garden, as you can see in this illustrated picture. But in fact, it almost looks like a savanna type, more arid than what I thought. And there's this big pond or bath, I guess. It was said that Queen Maya bathed in there before she gave birth to the Buddha. And when you go there, so when we went in 2000, they were doing some renovations. So it was all covered over and we could not see that well. But inside the building, and this is quite traditional, you'll find these statues of the baby Buddha with his finger pointing to the heavens and left hand pointing to the earth. Um, Also, what you'll find when you go there is, and you can't see the top of this because it's so tall, but there are these pillars with three lions at the very top, and this was actually put there by the king Ashoka, who lived about 300 years after the Buddha passed away, and he was actually quite a despot. He was the king. He was the person that is said to have unified India as one country, but he did it through force. Very brutal king, and yet after his many conquerings, he has a turn of heart and he turns to Buddhism as the way that the kingdom should follow the teachings of Buddhism. And so, to honor the Buddha, he actually erects these pillars in sites that were important to the life of the Buddha. So you'll find these pillars in various sites with the three lions on top. But anyways, this is what Lumbini looked like when we went there in year 2000. Now, as I mentioned, so Suddhodana raised his son Siddhartha very much in a sheltered existence. And it was said that he built different palaces for Siddhartha. He built a one palace for the winter, one palace for the summer, and one palace for the rainy months, the monsoon months. And some of the things that they may have had, and when we were there in 2000, this was not a palace that Siddhartha had been at, but it was actually, I believe this was the Red Fort. There are still palaces remaining from around that time. And one of the things that we were explained to by our guide was they actually had an air conditioning system. And you would think, well, how would they have an air conditioning system way back then? Well, what they did was most of these palaces will be pretty close to a river, and they would dredge the river and bring in a canal so that water would run through the palace. So you see this little waterway here. And as the water runs through the palace and it comes over this edge here, they would have oil lit lanterns in these little cutout portions. And so the water would run over and then it would glisten over these oil lit lanterns. But as the water runs through the palace, it dissipates the heat because the cool water takes away the heat. So that was their version of air conditioning. Of course, nothing compared to what we have today, but you know, back then that was quite the feat. And this waterway would then continue on down down the way. So, anyways, Siddhodana raised Siddhartha in this very sheltered existence. And some of the things that he would do was when Siddhartha would leave the royal palace, whenever he would leave the royal palace, Siddhodana would make sure that his servants and guards would go well in advance and clear all unsightly scenes so that Siddhartha would not see the various aspects of humanity. And you might think, well, that's an extreme. But when you think about what we do today, we still have remnants of things like that. Like when the G7 leaders meet, they make sure any protesters are blocks away, right? So they don't want to see. So it was not inconceivable that Suddhodana would do this. So it was even said that Suddhodana made all of the people in the palace, they even made them dye their hairs so that they wouldn't look like they were aging, right? So this is how Siddhartha grew up, and he was given opportunity to have the best education. They brought in the best teachers in the country. He was uh, taught the many sports that they had, so he was both physically and mentally extremely well gifted. And it said at the age of 19, uh, he was made an arranged marriage to a princess by the name of Yashodhara. Yashodhara was again from a neighboring kingdom, and a lot of these arranged marriages were political in many ways for kingdoms to sort of bridge themselves together. So Yashodhara, and although Yashodhara did truly love Siddhartha, and in fact, for a number of years, Yashodhara and Siddhartha did not have any children, but she finally conceives, and she gives birth to their only son when Siddhartha is 29. Now, it's also the same year, 29, that Siddhartha actually leaves the royal palace in search of what we call the truth. So, leading up to that, actually, getting back to his youth as a child, although he led a sheltered life, we know that Siddhartha was a very, very compassionate and deep thinker, even from a young child. And there are episodes that allude to this. One episode was when his father had taken him to a spring festival, farm festival, and there he saw the farmers uh, digging up the ground, tilling the ground, so that they could plant their seeds. And when they started digging up the ground, um, some grub came to the surface. And it said that Siddhartha saw the birds swooping in to eat the grub. And he lamented at that, saying that this earth is a place where the strong take the life of the weak. And so that was a comment that he made at a very young age. Even though, you know, his father tried giving him the sheltered life. And even at something like a spring festival, you wouldn't really think that that would trigger suffering. But for young Siddhartha, it started him thinking. We also know when he was born um, that his mother, Queen Maya, Mahamaya, she passed away about a week after he was born. Um, there's no exact record for why she passed away, but most likely due to complications in childbirth. Of course, back then, childbirth was much more riskier than it is today, and so um, she ends up passing away only a week after he is born. And so he's actually raised by his stepmother, who was the younger sister of Queen Maya. Her name was Mahapajapati, and she ends up raising. Oops, excuse me for a second. Uh, Sorry about that. Let's turn my. Sorry, my phone rang. I'm just gonna shut it off. Mm. Um, so he's raised by his stepmother, Mahapajapati, and so led he leads this very sheltered life. But there's a famous story of uh, Siddhartha going out on four different occasions when he was in his late 20s. And it's said that during these occasions, he really sees some aspects of humanity that he had not seen before. And it said on the first occasion, he leaves the eastern gates. And when he leaves the eastern gates, he sees an elderly person, although this person looks very happy, but he sees an elderly person and it kind of surprises him. And he asks his royal advisor, he said, well, what form of being is that? And the advisor tells him, well, that's an elderly person. And Siddhartha asks him, how does one become elderly? And the advisor tells him, well, sure as we're born, we all must age. And so he gets a little unnerved by that and he goes back to the royal palace. And then it said on the next occasion, he exits the southern gates. And when he exits the southern gates, he comes across a person that is quite ill. And again, he goes to the same conversation with his advisor, asking him, what form of being is that? And he's told, well, that's somebody that's very sick. And he asks, well, you know, will that happen to me as well? And he's again told, as sure as we're born, it happens to all of us. And this really scares him a bit. So he goes back to the palace. And then on the next occasion, said he exits the western gate. And there he encounters a funeral procession. And he's asked what's going on. And he's told about the funeral and the passing of an individual. And again, he asks the same conversation, saying, "Well, will that happen to me as well?" And he's told that, as sure as you're born, um, we must all encounter that. And so he gets frightened and goes back to the palace. And on the fourth occasion, it says he goes out the northern gate and he comes across a yogi, a mendicant, who has very little possessions, just the robes that he's wearing. And yet he had an aura of peace around him. And so he asks, well, what form of being is that? And he's told he's a mendicant, a yogi, a person who has no earthly belongings, but one who searches for the truth. And it's said that really influences Siddhartha and propels him to leave the royal palace. So this is the story that's told. But I think a better way of understanding this is that you can say that these were sort of the straw that broke the camel's back, because I'm sure Siddhartha was thinking throughout his life about various things. And it's very hard to imagine he would never have gotten sick in 29 years or that he would have never encountered somebody that's old. But they use this as a story to show that, these four incidents really influenced his way of thinking. The other thing that is not um, often emphasized was the fact that um, the year he left was the year that his son was born. So if you think that he might have been thinking about getting old or mortality, death, life and death previously, you can imagine what his thoughts turned to when his newborn infant came into the world. He was filled with both joy as well as anxiety. If you think that, one day you're going to have to part with this newly born infant, you could uh, become quite anxious and fearful. So, um, in the end, at the age of 29, it said that one evening, uh, the, a very ominous um, fog type thing came over the royal palace, and everybody fell into a deep sleep except for Siddhartha. And it was said that at that time he took leave of the royal palace, and it said that he took his his page, the person that looks after his uh, daily welfare, and he took and his trusted horse, Kandaka, and they leave on this. Um, they leave the royal palace in search of the truth, and it's said at that time that uh, he cuts off his long hair, the hair of the prince, and he throws his hair up in the sky. And the legend says that he's the he makes a declaration that until he finds enlightenment, or no, if if the hair should fall down to the earth, then he will forego his search. But if it remains in the heavens, then he will not rest until he finds enlightenment. And it said that that hair remains suspended in the air. Again, another legend. But that was his renunciation. And there you can see in the background is his trusty horse and his servant. And he bids them farewell and sends them back to the royal palace. And it said that he then goes in search of um, the truth. And he begins actually by seeking out many great uh, teachers throughout the land, throughout the kingdom. And although they had many good ideas, he was not completely satisfied by any of them. So he decides himself to go to do what we call ascetic practices. There was a belief at that time in India that one can sever the impurities of the body and get to the purities of the mind. And so in order to do that, the belief was you had to do these very hard practices. And so he starts these ascetic practices. In the meantime, King Siddhartha is deeply worried about his son who has gone off in search of this truth. And although he did not agree with Siddhartha, Siddhartha nonetheless um, acknowledged, I guess, his son. But to make sure that he was okay, Siddhartha actually selects 5 young men from the kingdom, 5 of the best young men, and he actually sends them out to join Siddhartha to do these practices. So there's in the Buddhist story, it talks about Siddhartha doing these ascetic practices with 5 mendicants, but they were actually sent out by the king to make sure to sort of keep an eye out for him, if you will. So these ascetic practices, there's record of the kind of things they did, and of course, some of the more common ones would be fasting for days on end, so not eating any food for days on end, not drinking for extended periods. The one that really gets to me is there's one that says not breathing. And I don't know how you practice that one, but apparently that was part of their practice. And they would live in the forest and sleep on the ground. Um, they led a very, very meager lifestyle, very difficult lifestyle. And so this is actually a very famous statue. This comes from what they call the Gandhara province. And this is a statue showing the Buddha during his ascetic practices. And you can see he's literally skin and bones is what it comes down to. Um, and his eye sockets are very drawn in, gaunt looking. So he does this for 6 years, but at the end of 6 years, um, he realizes that this isn't perhaps the way, and he actually, uh, I won't say gives up, but what happens is that there's he loses all his strength, and when he is by a riverside, a young maiden by the name of Sujata happens to come by, and she actually mistakes the Siddhartha for a deity, like a forest god, if you will, and she makes an offering of rice porridge to him, and Siddhartha actually receives that rice porridge, and it's said that he gains strength from that rice porridge. Now, the five uh, mendicants that were with him, even though they started off as being sort of looking out for him, over the 6 years, they became very devout mountain ascetics. So when they actually see that Siddhartha had taken this rice porridge, they sort of lose faith in him. They figured, oh, he's given in to earthly ways. And so they actually take leave of him. In the meantime, he gains strength from this rice porridge. And after having eaten it, again, another legend states that he takes that rice bowl and he puts it in the river. And again, he states that he will now go on his ultimate um, quest for enlightenment. And should that bowl uh, instead of flowing downriver, should it go upstream, then that will be a sign that he will ultimately attain his goal. And it said, of course, that the bowl, as he puts it in the river, instead of going downstream, it actually goes against the current. So, and then from that point on, it said that Siddhartha then goes under, it was known as a pipala tree, but we now call it the Bodhi tree. And he meditates for 49 days under this Bodhi tree. And he has a great battle with the king of the underworld, a person by the name of Mara. And Mara does not want the Buddha to attain enlightenment because Mara wants everybody to stay in a realm of delusion. And so Mara, first of all, tries to scare the Buddha from his uh, meditation. And he sends all his fiercest warriors to um, attack him. But when I say attack him, this is all mental, it's not physical. So they shoot arrows at Siddhartha, but instead of being arrows, they turn into flower petals that gently float down around him. And so, undeterred by this, Mara then sends his daughters to try to seduce him out of his meditation. And despite their appearance of being very beautiful young maidens, Siddhartha sees through their guise, and he says, in fact, that they too will grow old and die. And in fact, yeah, they turn into hags in front of him. And then, having failed at that, then Mara, um, in his final attempt, he disguises himself or becomes a splitting image of the Buddha and stands in front of him or sits in front of him and trying to urge him to stop this silly search, that he can have all the things that he wants on this earth right now. Why should you continue on for this search of enlightenment? But again, Siddhartha sees right through this, and he does not budge. And it's said, on the 49th day, that he attains the state of what we call enlightenment. And what it is that he attains the true understanding of things as they are, and he then encounters a deep sense of peace and calmness. And that was what the state of enlightenment was. And so, from that point on, once he attained enlightenment, it said that he spends another 49 days, and he starts meditating or contemplating on this new enlightenment awakening that he's had. And he starts thinking, realizing about a number of different things. He's able to see past lives, the present life, and even future lives. And he's able to see the various aspects of cause and effect, how things come about. And he meditates on numerous things for 49 days. And at one point, he's just basking or quietly enjoying this enlightenment that he has, and then he begins to actually doubt that others would understand this state of enlightenment. And so, for a time, he begins to think whether he should share this with anybody or not. And it's then that it's said, according to the legends, that he is visited by some heavenly deities who urge him to share with others what he has awakened to. And so, out of deep compassion for humanity or for all beings, Siddhartha makes that ultimate decision to share what he has awakened to. And so, he begins to contemplate, well, who should he start sharing this revelation, this awakening with? And the people that come to his mind right away were the 5 mendicants that he had been practicing with over the 5 years. So he actually goes to seek out where they had gone to. And they actually went. So this is a very famous portrait of him in that attaining enlightenment. And you can see, so here's Mara down here on the right-hand corner, and he's sending his various minions to try to dissuade the Buddha, and then also his daughters at the bottom there trying to seduce him. And the Buddha remains calm throughout. And at when he does attain that enlightenment, it's said that he actually touches the earth, and he says, "As the earth is my witness, I shall not return. I shall not be born again into this realm of samsara. Samsara is a realm of suffering." And so he says, I shall not return or be born again into this realm. So if you ever see a Buddha statue just like this, with one hand touching the ground, that is a statue of when he attained enlightenment. Okay, so there are, with Buddha statues, there are basically 3 different kinds of statues. One is a sitting Buddha. And usually the sitting Buddha is exemplifying contemplation, meditating. It also represents wisdom. And then you also find other statues of the standing Buddha. And standing Buddha is more of a dynamic aspect of the Buddha, represents compassion. So if you see a standing Buddha, it's showing a more dynamic aspect. And the third common statue is a Buddha in recline, lying down. If you ever see a statue of the Buddha lying down, that's only reserved for the historical Buddha when he passed away. So if you ever see one that lying down, you'll say, oh, that's when the Buddha passed away. And so, and then this particular image of the Buddha touching the earth is when he attained enlightenment. And so if you see it, and this happened in a place called Buddha Gaya. Okay, and if you go to Buddha Gaya today, so it's quite an interesting village. I call it the Epcot Center of Buddhism. And the reason is that, well, in the center of the village, there is this Mahabodhi temple, this very large temple. And in right beside it is this Bodhi tree. This is, I believe, the third or fourth generation Bodhi tree. This was from a cutting from Sri Lanka that they brought over, which was originally transplanted to Sri Lanka from Buddha Gaya. So this is several generations on. This temple was actually very interesting in that it was until the 1800s, it was mainly buried underground. And the reason why it was buried was they buried it to protect it from the Mongol, the Muslim invaders. So throughout India's history, you have the Hindus, and you also have Muslims. And when the Muslims invaded India, they did some, well, I guess to their religion it was okay, but they desecrated a lot of temples, both Buddhist and Hindu temples. They defaced a lot of the images, and they would often use parts of their temples as sort of to build their own mosques, and in a very not so favorable way to those native religions. And so, as a way to protect it, they actually buried this temple. And it was found, I believe it was an English explorer who found it and dug it out. So now you can see the whole temple in its glory. But what's interesting about Buddha Gaya, so it said just near Buddha Gaya is where Siddhartha attained enlightenment in the river after receiving the rice porridge from the maiden Sujata. And what's happened more recently around Buddha Gaya is that in the center you have this Mahabodhi temple, and you have this is the image inside the Mahabodhi temple. And as you can see, this one here, although it's covered in cloth, you can see the fingertips out. This is the Buddha touching the earth. So his proclamation of attaining enlightenment. And throughout the compound, you have these little alcoves or little worship areas. And you have many, many people coming to visit, to worship. And but why I call it the Epcot Center is around this main temple, Buddhists from around the world have different denominations have come, and they have actually built temples according to their own school or lineage. So you'll find Tibetan temples, Thai-looking temples, and the architecture is quite different, as you can see. And they're all in this one little village. There's even a Japanese style temple as well. And so um, when you go there, you can actually go and do retreats at each of these temples. We actually, when we were there in 2000, we stayed at the Japanese temple, and it was fascinating. This young fellow here. So one of the things that happens when you go there, so we had a chartered bus, and the bus would drive us around, and but these young fellows would be on their bicycles, and they would beat us to all the sites that we were going to, and in the end, they ended up becoming like our personal guides. So this young fellow, he had a bike with sort of a uh, I wouldn't even call it back seat. It was like where you put luggage and stuff, a little rack. And so I would sit on the back as he took me to various places. I had some interesting experiences. One was he took me. Oh, I asked him. I wanted to get a haircut, and so I thought, oh, it'd be interesting to go to a local barber. So he took me to a local barber, and it was interesting because there were some monks that were beside me, and I go in there, and he's doing all the translating for me. These young kids, they're quite amazing. They pick up language, whether it's Japanese or English, or they pick it up quite quickly and quite well as well. Anyways, he took me to this barber shop, and I get in there, and well, I asked him, how much it cost for a haircut. And he said 30 rupees. And 30 rupees around that time was about 90 cents, I think it was. So I figured, well, that's really not bad. So then, he gives me the haircut. And after the haircut, I gave him a 5 rupee tip. So 35 rupees. And everybody in the barbershop was laughing, and I couldn't figure out why. Of course, I couldn't figure out why they were laughing. And after we left the barbershop, I asked my guide, I said, what was that all about? Why were they laughing? And he said, well, they were laughing because you paid 30 rupees for a 10 rupee haircut, because the locals would only pay 10 rupees. And on top of that, you gave a 5 rupee tip. So they were all laughing. But anyways, again, that's another aside. But we stayed there for several days, and if you ever get a chance to go to India and you go to Bodh Gaya, it is one of the places where you could spend quite a time, um, and visiting each of these temples. You can do retreats at them. There's just a completely different outlook, and way of looking at life. Another really memorable experience for me was I went out for a walk one morning. Oh, it was quite early in the morning that I went out. And as I was walking, there was a gentleman who lived in, well, I mean, for all intents and purposes, it looked like a shack to me, but that was his home. He waved me over, and he actually invited me for a morning chai. And I thought to myself, wow, here's this man living in a shack, and he's inviting this stranger for morning chai. And I thought to myself, and like he could speak maybe one or two words of English, and yet we shared this moment together. And I realized that there was great humanity that existed there. We have the modern, all the modern conveniences of our nation, and yet, who in our neighborhood would wave a stranger to come in and join in for morning chai, right? So there's something to be said, when you experience something like that. You realize that in fact there's a aspect of humanity that we seem to have lost in our society that is still very much was still very much in existence. Anyways, again, I, I telling you. So the Buddha then, after he attains enlightenment, he goes in search of his the five mendicants that he um, shared the 6 year ascetic practices with. And they end up being near a place called Varanasi. Varanasi is actually the Mecca. Okay, so here's the map of. So where the Buddha was born, so the kingdom was Kapilavastu, just up top here, and just north west of that is Lumbini. And if you can see this little dotted line, that's actually the border of India and Nepal. So you can see where Kapilavastu is on the India side, but Lumbini is on the Nepal side of this border. So he's born in Lumbini, and so the place that his there it is. Okay. His the five mendicants. So after so Buddha Gaya is where's Buddha Gaya is where's Buddha Gaya down here. Okay. So this is where the Buddha ended up attaining enlightenment, Buddha Gaya. And then once he attained enlightenment, he went in search of those five mendicants, and they were at this place called Sarnath, which is right by Varanasi. Varanasi is the Mecca for the Hindus. And the reason why it's the Mecca is that the Ganges River right goes right through it. And it's the belief of all Hindus that when you pass away, your remains are to be returned into the Ganges River. The Ganges River literally means the river of life. And so for the Hindus, it is the goal once in a lifetime to either go to Varanasi or if when you pass away to have your remains put in the Ganges River. Of course, the reality is that the vast majority are too poor to actually make it there, and they all their remains are placed in the river wherever their village is. But that's the ideal is to go to Varanasi. It's a fascinating place on its own. When you go there, it is filled with pilgrims from around the world who want to visit there and also see the Ganges River. And the Ganges River itself is, this is sacred for them to take a bath in the Ganges River or cleanse themselves in the Ganges River. But again, the reality is it's a filthy river. I would never go in there. And they were going in there. And what you'll see is that along the Ganges River, they call them ghats, and they're like these steps that lead down into the river. And at there's several points where they actually have a crematorium, or they're not buildings; it's open air. But what they have piles of wood that they cremate the bodies, and then the cremated remains they put in the river. Um, and then, interestingly enough, just a little ways down the river, you have people washing their laundry as well. So this all happens in this one river. Anyways, it's past 8:30 now. I'm going to continue on from here next week and get on to the first teaching of once he attained Buddha to the five mendicants. And so I'll send you this material by email. If you did not, let's see. if you could all send me your email address just so that I know, I don't want to send out randomly to all the people I send out invitations to because there's quite a list. So if I can ask you, if you could please send me your email, just a very brief email, and you could send it to either my personal email, which is Grant, Grant dot Ikuta, Ikuta @gmail.com, or you could email me at rev dot Ikuta at Steveston, Steveston hyphen temple, Temple .ca. You know what? I'm just going to put that up. Wait. Here, I'm going to put it up on the chat right now. These are my two email addresses. There's one, and the other is there's the other one. So for anybody who wishes to, if you could just send me a very brief email, and then I could send you the information. As I said, I don't want to send out the information to everybody who received the initial invitation, but I would definitely send it out to you, the material. So if you can email, does everybody have that? And then we'll continue on next week from Sarnath, where the Buddha gave his first teaching, called the turning of the wheel, and that's where he teaches the most fundamental teaching, which is known as the Four Noble Truths. So we'll get into that next week. As I say, I get into tangents and stories. So although I say 5 weeks, it may be longer, but hopefully 5 weeks. Okay. Does anybody have any questions or comments? I'm just going to please unmute yourself and spot one. Any questions or comments? Everybody okay? Was that, were you able to follow along? Yes, no, yeah, okay, good, good. Again, as I said, so I actually printed out some, but I have all the information, so I'll send this as long as, along with the slideshow, that the slides that I presented. Okay. And if you have any questions throughout the week, please feel free to contact me as well. Okay, thanks everyone. And we'll just close with it, putting our hands together and gasho. Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu. And we will see you next week.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.